Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Employee Pension and Trust Committee meeting for August the 25th, 2025. I will begin the meeting by calling the meeting to order. We'll do a roll call vote. Ken Moore, how do you vote? Keith McGee? Kevin Townsell, how do you vote?
Present.
Scott Quinn, how do you vote?
Present.
And Suzanne Carter, how do you vote?
Present.
And Bob Ravender. Bob, I guess this is your first meeting, okay? Present. All right, and the chair is present. So we're all present. I'll also say that we need to have a setting of the agenda. If anyone wants to make a changes on the agenda, this is the time to do that. If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the agenda as presented. Anyone wish to make any changes?
I'll make a motion. I'll second.
Proper motion to the second. Let's do a roll call vote on that also. Mayor Moore, how do you vote?
Yes.
Keith McGee, how do you vote?
Yes.
Kevin Townsell, how do you vote?
Yes.
Scott Quinn, how do you vote?
Yes.
Suzanne Carter, how do you vote?
Yes.
Bob Ravender, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes to accept the agenda as presented. Also, it's time, at this particular time, if there's anyone here who wants to make a comment on something related to the Pension and Trust Committee that is not on the agenda, now's the time to come forward. We'll give you a few minutes to make that comment or anything, and I don't see anyone jumping up to grab the microphone. So it's not the Academy Awards then, is it? The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. If there's any additions, corrections, we'll do those now. If not, I will consider an approval of the minutes as presented. Has everyone had a chance to look at those? Proper motion to a second?
I'll second.
Kevin seconds. Let's do a roll call vote on those also. Mayor Moore, how do you vote?
Yes.
Bob Ravender, how do you vote?
Yes.
Kevin, how do you vote?
Yes.
Scott, Keith McGee, how do you vote?
Yes.
Suzanne, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Scott, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on that also. So the second item on the agenda is report from the investment administrator of the city's pension programs. Let's do, Christine, you need to take that from here, and we'll introduce our guest and what will be covered in this particular item on the agenda.
Thank you, Alderman Barnhill. And today we are pleased to have with us Daniel Cruz. He's the Deputy Chief Investment Officer for the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System. This is part of the state of Tennessee's Department of Treasury. And since 2016, the state has managed the investments for what we refer to as the closed pension plan. And they have managed that on those investments on the city's behalf since that time. Certainly, they also manage lots of investments, a variety of investments, but they also do, of course, manage all the retirement investments for all of the employees who are part of the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System, which the city has been in since 2017 for new hires. However, we wanted to invite TCRS here today to give this committee an update on not only the activities that are going on right now with their investment program, but they're also going to give, Daniel's going to give a little bit of a snapshot of their service to the city since they began helping us with the closed plan. So I think it'll be a good history of what they have been providing for us for going on 10 years now. So we're pleased to have Daniel Cruz with us.
Thank you, Christine, Chair, and Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to update you on the investment program. So the slides will come up here in just a second, but Michael Breakbill, the Chief Investment Officer, was scheduled to be here today, and he sends his regrets. He actually had a mountain biking accident this past weekend and was unable to come today, but I appreciate your letting me update you. So if we can move to slide 3, this is a quick intro on me. And the main bullet points on me are I've been with the state Treasury's investment team for over 26 years. I've run public equities portfolios, the private equity platform, cash with good results. And also I'm a native of Middle Tennessee, but I'm now a Franklin resident. So I appreciate what you do. It's a very well-run city. So thank you for your service. I think I think it's a good decision to be with the Treasury investments for the closed plan, and we've done some good things together. So if we could go to the first, this is an org chart for us on the whole investment team. Sits within the treasury of the state, so the person above this would be Treasurer Lillard of the state. And we're about 40 investment professionals that take care of all of the various monies that the state has on hand, or local government money, things for all the programs in the state that require investing. And so I'm not going to go into detail here, but as we go along, if there's questions, please definitely jump in, stop me, and we'll discuss it. But my first run through on this was 30 minutes, so I'm going to keep going. So this is everything we manage here. It's over 130 billion together. The lion's share is TCRS, the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System, mainly for state employees and teachers in the state. And the Franklin money is invested pari passu alongside TCRS. So essentially it's in that retirement pie slice. Other things that we do, the red pie slice there, the larger one is, this says SPIF LGIP. That's the State Pooled Investment Fund and Local Government Investment Pool. That's cash. Essentially it's a money market mutual fund. We also have TN Promise, the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, deferred comp money and things like that, and these other programs. There are various trusts and endowments that have their own policies and timelines and risk tolerances and things. So altogether, our team takes care of essentially all the money that the state has to steward. If we could go to the next slide. And this is a timeline of Franklin's involvement with us on this front. So back in 2016, it started with the third-party administrator services, leveraging the scale of the Treasury's functions like benefits counseling and calculation and reporting and those kinds of things. And then originally Franklin sold down assets in the closed plan and bought shares of TRGT. TRGT is the Treasury Retirement Group Trust, or the Target Fund, and it's the vehicle that allows us to invest money alongside TCRS, but keep them separate. So there's just one investment portfolio is the TRGT. So Franklin and TCRS are invested in the TRGT. We own shares, Franklin owns shares. We invest the TRGT. So you'll see that throughout here, but essentially it's just what allows Franklin and some other participants to invest alongside TCRS. And so that started in 2016. There were some legacy alternative investment funds that we weren't able to transfer into the TRGT. And for those, we've since 2018 have been managing or monitoring those and letting them manage down over time. Those will eventually go to zero. We'll cover the balance on those now, but we also take care of those. Thank you. Here, I'm just going to look at the first two columns. So when Franklin started with us overseeing those investments, so March 31st, 2019, when the alternative funds came in, this is what the ratio looked like. It was 104.1 million TRGT units, so that's $104.1 million invested alongside TCRS back then. And the alternative funds on the side were 5.7 million. Flash forward to June 30th of this year, we have 177.1 million in the TRGT alongside TCRS for Franklin, and then 3 million left in the alternative investment funds. And on this slide, this was one of the original performance reports for Franklin. The results here are really not that important. This was very early on, before we had even had a full more than a year of history. But the key thing here is that middle line, City of Franklin separate LP. That is the alternative funds, and it was over 5% of the portfolio when we started together. So on the next slide, we'll see this is Franklin's performance report from June 30th. That middle line, the City of Franklin separate LP, the weight has gone down to 1.68%. And so those alternative funds are falling over time and will eventually go to zero, but we've monitored and managed those down. At the same time, the balance that is in the TRGT has gone up significantly. The bottom line is the one to focus on because the last investment decision that Franklin made to invest alongside TCRS, that's what that bottom line will tell you, was that a good decision or not. And so inception to date returns of 8.86% per year is what we've delivered so far. The 5-year at 9.3%, and then the 1 year at 10.23%. So I would say returns have been pretty healthy and fairly consistent as long as Franklin's been with us. And our actuarial return is 7.25% for TCRS, and so, materially higher than that. So happy to take any questions on this or at the end, but this is kind of looking, if you looked at Franklin's account, this is what you would see as the returns of what you all have produced with this decision. So if no questions right now, I'll move on to the next slide. This is a breakdown looking at the TRGT individual portfolios that our team runs. There's a lot of numbers here, and again, happy to dive into any individual numbers. I'd like to focus just on this fiscal year to date. That's the 1-year return through June 30th. Some of the things you'll note is that equities had a good year almost across the world. U.S. equities returning, our portfolio did 14.64%. It's a very strong return. Canada, the Canada line here, they did 26.68%. So Canada had an outstanding year for returns on the equity side. Some other notes here I would make over the last year is real estate and traditional private equity, which is leveraged buyout and venture. Those two portfolios had struggled for a couple years. They've performed well versus the benchmark and the market, but the market's been soft in both of those areas. It's starting to improve again, so the real estate markets turned positive again. Private equity did 7.39% for the year. If you look back at the longer horizons, like the 5-year, the private equity, traditional private equity is returning 17.67%, which is very strong. And then the real estate team has beat the market considerably over all these time frames. So the portfolios have performed well themselves, but those assets in the market have not done well for a couple of years until now. And then the strategic lending portfolio, second to last, that's alternative credit, non-investment grade, a little bit riskier credit. That market has done very well over all these time frames. It was a great place to be invested, and that team's done a great job. So those would be some things that I would highlight, just watching the markets all the time. But key thing is over these longer horizons, Franklin and TCRS have done well together in these portfolios. That's how I would characterize it. So if no questions right now, I'll move on to the next slide. And this is looking where the dollars invested are invested for TRGT. This is all of us together, so TCRS plus Franklin, plus some other participants that are alongside, like a deferred comp option that we have. And almost half of it is in equities, the whole right side almost, the total U.S. equity, Canada Index Fund, international developed markets, and international emerging markets. That's all stocks. The green pieces at the top, the U.S. fixed income, and total short term. Total short term is essentially cash. Those are our safer yielding, liquid investments that we have that are paying interest. And then we have the alternative funds and strategic lending, real estate, and private equity that are adding more risk and more duration to the portfolio. But the weights on the left side is how it currently breaks down. And then on the next slide, so these slides show the alternative funds. So originally it was $5.7 million invested across these 5 funds, 3 timber funds, and 2 secondary funds. There's a lot of jargon when you get into private investment funds, and so I'm happy to stop anywhere and explain anything on these. But this was the original look at what came in. And then if we go to the next slide, this is what you have today that has not finished up yet. So there are 2 funds that are still going, concerns. The first one is RMS Growth 3, and there's 1.25 million left in that one. It's scheduled to be done in the next year or 2, and they have the right, sometime they'll come back and ask to extend it further to get better pricing on the assets to deliver a better return. But we expect it to finish up in the next year or 2. And then the FIA Timber investment as well is around. It was a younger investment and is already scheduled to be around probably through 2030. So it'll have what I would call a long tail, but these things are going towards zero and will continue to move in that direction. And then if we can move to the next slide. And so this shows how those have performed. These are the alternative funds. The 3 on the left are the ones that have finished and are no longer trying to add value to their investments. They are winding down. There's some residual NAV that needs to be paid out. They're in escrow accounts for the Landmark and Hamilton Lane investments. The ones on the right are the funds that are still trying to add value and produce returns. And so RMS is the one that we expect to finish up soon, and then FIA Timber will be around for a while. And I'm happy to discuss what those kinds of funds do. I'm happy to discuss our investment platform. Maybe I think the next slide is questions maybe. Yes, so that's a kind of a really succinct explanation of what we do, and what we've done together with Franklin, but happy to jump into anything that would be helpful.
Any questions? Christine, you have any questions or comments?
I would just share that staff has an excellent working relationship with TCRS. There is an analyst who is assigned to assist us with, especially the last things that Daniel was talking about, those investments that are winding their way down. That monitoring that Daniel was describing does go on, it is an ongoing, and we do have interaction. They do help us participate. There are calls from time to time with those timber investments, and TCRS analysts will sit in on those calls, and certainly we can discuss because they work in this environment every day, all the time. So that they are a big assistance to the finance and administrative staff, and we appreciate what they do to assist us, because this is something that, this expanded role for them that they took on to help single employer public plans is, it really is, it's really something that's added value. It certainly not only has generated returns, but they have lowered the fees that the employer is paying into the pension fund. So we do appreciate what they do. So I think it helps to see the operation that they have, and as you see, they have about 40 full-time professionals working in investments every day, and that's something that's really very helpful to us here at the city.
Thank you.
Well, when we moved the funds, there was two groups that we did not move. They were timber, and as I look through some of this right here, it says Timber Growth Value Partners. That's what we have. Do we still have that?
We
We
have
have
two
that.
left. We have two left, and we've described those before as non-conforming assets. You've heard those a few times, that terminology, because that was something that, when Daniel was describing, just did not fit the investment model at TCRS, and they just needed time to work their way through, so that and that's what we have been giving them, and they have been, we have 3 that have worked their way through, and we have 2 left.
So Christine, you couldn't convince the state that they need a few trees?
Well, they,
We're doing our part.
Okay,
we
all
are
right.
doing
Yeah. Timber's an asset that if you expect a lot of inflation, that you would definitely want to consider. And, we went through a period where rates were 0 and inflation still didn't pick up so much. But yeah, we appreciate the opportunity to look at it, that's for sure.
Any other questions? Okay, Bob, you got any? Mayor, you have any questions?
No, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I would just add, this partnership has worked really well for us in terms of the quality of management. We are spending less on administration of the plan with, I think, an exceptional quality of professionalism and insight in the management of these assets. So I think we're in a great position with this, and appreciate the work and support from TCRS.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you all.
One final comment from you, Christine. We started out with the state with a value of what, and what is it now?
I believe we started at 109.
I
Okay?
think that's right. Yeah.
109 million was what we started at the start of 17, and we're, with the report that Daniel was showing, at the point in time that he was showing was 180 million. So we've grown, our assets have grown quite a bit in these years.
I think that's something that we probably need to make sure that every employee understands what that has done and what that's done for them, and also, whenever it's possible, the taxpayer needs to understand also what that means to them too, because if we don't get it in growth, we fund it in the tax structure that we have. So I think it's important that that message gets out and is understood by as many people as possible then. Any other questions?
I wish Mr. Craigville a speedy recovery.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Are we ready for item 2 then? Well, let's go to report from the actuary. Daniel, thank you. We appreciate that. Appreciate the report.
Good afternoon.
Ready for an introduction?
Ready.
All right. Well, this is also the time of year in which we do invite the actuary to give a report to this committee. There are many different reasons why we must do an annual actuarial report on both the open and the closed plans. The state of Tennessee requires it. Generally accepted accounting principles require an annual report. We also have additional oversight from the state of Tennessee on the closed single employer plan that requires an annual report. So this is a very important summation that our actuary provides every year. And USI is the actuary to the closed plan as selected by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. USI is also the actuary to the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System selected by the state of Tennessee. So while our actuary, Kevin Sullivan, is not necessarily assigned to the state plan, he does provide some summary information on the open TCRS plan as well in this report. We also are required to use these actuarial reports for the employer contributions that are funded in the annual budget. And so we do have a preliminary view of what the employer contributions will be, but this is something that does factor into when the city administrator makes his budget request to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, as he does receive this employer required funding amounts for both pension plans, and this is prepared by the independent actuary. So sometimes people may think that those numbers are, wonder where do those numbers come from for the employer contributions to pensions, and they are prepared independently and presented to us in this form in the fall. So Kevin is here to give us a presentation.
All right, great. I think you've got the material with you in your packets. So I'm going to dive in, and I'm going to hop over to slide 2. 2 and 3 are actually very similar information, one graphical, one in text. But depending on how you look at it, as Christine said, you've got 2 pension plans or maybe 5 pension plans, given that the legacy plan really has 4 different tiers within that, but it's all funded as a single plan. And then, of course, the new participants after January 1, 2017 move into the TCRS plan. So again, I have information on that plan in addition to the closed plan, but most of our attention will be focused on the closed plan. On slide 3, this gives a little bit more information about those 4 tiers within the legacy plan, all based on when individuals were hired or perhaps other changes that are listed there. But again, participants after January 1, 2017 move into the TCRS plan. And as we'll talk about in a moment, it's kind of interesting. So that means we're 8 years into the TCRS plan. The TCRS plan now has slightly more participants in it than the legacy plan in just 8 years. So that shows how quickly the populations change, and now we've got the larger half, slightly over half, in the TCRS plan. So moving on to slide 4, a little bit of assumption and method updates. So for 2025, we've lowered the discount rate from 6.8% to 6.75%. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it is dictated by Resolution 2025-18 passed earlier this year. Also, you'll remember that under state law, no municipal plan in Tennessee can be more than 50 basis points above what the state uses for the TCRS plan, which is currently 6.75%. So with this change, we're matching what TCRS has for their plan. Also, TCRS recently completed their experience study, and they did not change that rate or lower it. So that's good news from a consistency standpoint. We're likely to be at this rate for a few years. I think TCRS does an experience study every 4 to 5 years, and they just completed it. So it's likely to be 4 more years before we're looking at that. I think earlier this year when I was here, I mentioned that we didn't think they were going to change the rate, but ultimately they decided to not change the rate, so that's good. That change from the 6.8 down to 6.75 does increase the liability slightly by about $1.2 million and about a $200,000 increase in the contribution. Also, for the 2025 valuation, we've continued to use the mortality assumption that includes projected mortality improvements in accordance with state law TCA 9-3-501. And we're using 105% of the RP 2014 healthy annuitants and non-annuitants mortality table blue collar. A little bit what that means, we as actuaries kind of divide the population into different groups. We look at white collar, blue collar, maybe a blend of the two. Blue collar tend to be more physically demanding jobs that typically have slightly higher mortality than maybe white collar office jobs. But we're using a blue collar table, and that may be less about the employee population of the city of Franklin and more just about expected slightly higher mortality. Mortality varies significantly by region of the country, and really within that it's varying more by the economic circumstances in those regions. As you might imagine, Tennessee being in the South has higher mortality than the overall country. However, if you look within counties within Tennessee, Williamson County has one of the lower rates of mortality, better experience for the participant standpoint, maybe more consistent with the national average, but still we expect slightly higher mortality than the overall national average. That's why we're looking at that 105%, a slight load. For comparison purposes, Metro Nashville, which has a larger population that we've got more ability to look at their history and predict, we're using a 115%, actually lower that recently to 112% of RP 2014 blue collar. So that difference indicating that we expect Franklin and its employees to have better mortality experience than maybe a large population nearby in Metro Nashville. And again, we are using 10 years of mortality improvements with scale MP21. That means each year we're expecting mortality to continue to improve for the following 10 years. A little bit more on assumptions on slide 5, just kind of summarizing the results of the experience study. Again, the decline in the discount rate from 6.8 to 6.75, no change to mortality. Also no change to the cost of living assumption, leaving that at 2%. And then some additional assumptions that we looked at but ultimately decided not to recommend changes on our salary increase assumptions, rates of retirement, and rates of termination. And that is even after the fact that we know we have seen slightly higher salary increases than expected over the last couple of years, and retirements and terminations really looking like folks are delaying slightly retirement, so that's actually creates an increase in cost of the plan. Those things tend to be very transitory, kind of moving with the economy, so those things we don't expect to be indicative of a trend. It's just things that are happening in the near term that will likely revert back to the historical experience pretty soon. Certainly on the salary increases being slightly greater than expected, that's something that's not unique to the city of Franklin. We're seeing that across the economy where there's a little bit of catch up after COVID, where there have been slightly higher pay increases really throughout the economy. And again, those are expected to be transitory, not recurring on an annual basis. So let's see, moving on to slide 6, this gives a summary of the asset changes year over year. So we started the year January 1, 2024 at a market value of $159,374,000. If we weight that with expected contributions and distributions, or our actual contributions and distributions for the year based on when we expect those to come in during the year, we apply an expected rate of return that would be 6.8% of that. So we have an expected return of $10,684,000. If we look at what the actual return was actually better than that. We expected a return of 6.8%. It was actually 8.61%. So we have a gain for the year of about $2.5 million. And there in the middle of slide 6, you see the history of the last 4 years. Here, gains are shown as negative, so better than expected are shown as negative. Worse than expected is shown as positive. I know that's a little counterintuitive. And so the big number here is that $27.8 million loss versus expected for the 2022 plan year, but had gains in the other 3 years. These gains and losses are actually largely offsetting. So we've had about a $28 million loss and a little over $24 million in gains. So for the 4-year period, they're largely offsetting. But we recognize those at about 20% or 20% per year into the actuarial value of assets, and that calculation is shown at the bottom. So while at January 1, 2025, we have a market value of $173,765,000, When we smooth in those gains and losses, it gives us an actuarial value of assets of just over 176 million. And of course, we have a 10% corridor so that the actuarial value of assets, which smooths in those gains and losses, can't be more than 10% different from the actual market value. And it's not, it's actually very close to market value right now. So that's our value we've used to valuation of just over 176 million. So on slide 7, this shows a snapshot of the funded status at 6.75 under 3 different measures of how well the plan is funded. And these 3 measures are the present value of benefits, the entry age normal accrued liability, and the accumulated benefit obligation. And you've probably heard me say this before, I think the entry age normal accrued liability is the better measure of how well funded the plan is. Present value of benefits looks at all benefits that are expected to be earned by your active population in addition to the benefits already earned by your retired and terminated vested population. So it's really overstating the liabilities because it's including liabilities for service that has not yet been rendered. So it's looking at everything that's expected to happen through the life of the plan. And so that shows the lowest funded ratio at 63.7%, down slightly from 64.3 for the prior year. The entry age normal accrued liability really looks at accrued liability to date, spreading the active participants' liability over their expected working career. And again, we think this is the best measure. The funded ratio is 67.8% for the 2025 plan year, down slightly from 68.8% for the prior year. And the accumulated benefit obligation is assuming everyone who's active terminates on the valuation date, which certainly is not a reasonable assumption. That's very unlikely to happen. But if it did, all that future service that's included in, to some level in the entry age normal and fully included in the present value of benefits goes away. And so the liability of the plan drops, the funded ratio rises, and so you'd have an 82.2% funded ratio. Again, we don't think that's a reasonable measure of how well the plan is funded. We think the entry age normal is the best measure. Now, you may remember that we have seen that funded ratio decline slightly in the last few years. That's really due to 2 or 3 primary reasons. One, we've had assumption changes consistently where we've been lowering that discount rate. That's probably the smaller impact. Probably the larger are first the large asset loss we had in 2022. That hurt us a little bit. But also the salary increases greater than expected over the last few years. That has a pretty significant impact on the active liability, causing it to rise. Again, to the extent that those level of increases don't continue to recur, things will stabilize. And based on the contributions that the city is making to the plan, the funded ratio is going to improve fairly rapidly over time, assuming we don't have investment losses or any other unusual events. So on slide 8, this shows the results for the 2028 plan year and the 3 preceding plan years. A couple of things to note. You will notice in the population counts how that active population is declining as you move from right to left, while the deferred vested is actually shrinking as well, but the retiree and disabled population is increasing rapidly as both the active and deferred vested move into retired status. This shows also the annual covered payroll, average earnings, present value of benefits, entry age past service liability, and the actuarial value of assets. I will draw your attention to that unfunded supplemental liability. That's the unfunded liability of the plan. As I mentioned earlier, with the funded ratio falling, you'll see a corresponding increase in the unfunded liability, because those are really 2 sides of the same coin. As the unfunded liability grows, the funded ratio of the plan is going to fall. And you do see with the impact of the salary increases, asset losses, and the assumption changes, that number has grown over the last few years. But again, to the extent things return to normal as far as active salary increases, retirements, terminations, we have good stability in the investment return or some good return. The contributions coming in are going to amortize that unfunded liability fairly quickly. The normal cost is the value of new benefits earned during the year. That number, even with the pay increases being greater than expected, has been fairly stable, increasing slightly. As a percent of payroll, very stable, really only changing from a low of 7.61 to a high of 7.82. And then the recommended contribution is shown 4 lines from the bottom, currently $11,378,000. Up slightly from $10.2 million for the prior year, but again, you do see a bit of an increase a more significant increase over the last couple of years. See, moving on to slide 9, this just shows us a graphical snapshot of the assets and liabilities of the plan. In blue, you'll see the liability growth from left to right from 2021 to 2025. Again, that's a result of some of those factors such as the salary increase greater than expected and folks putting off retirements and terminations. Asset growth, though, the assets have actually still been growing largely through this period with just the impact of contributions and an investment return. So this does show the funded ratio falling from 82.81% for 2021 down to the current 67.8%, as that discount rate has fallen throughout that period, contributing to that decline in the funded ratio. So on slide 10, this shows same information on the contribution, just graphically, increasing from going back a year further to 2020, a 5.1 million contribution, again rising pretty significantly over the last few years to the current 11.38 million number. On slide 11, this just graphically shows the population breakdown between active in blue, deferred vested in green, and the retirees in red. And this is a trend you're going to see continue as the plan ages. The active population is going to continue to shrink. Deferred vested will probably remain fairly stable, but that retired population will continue to grow as folks continue to move from active and deferred vested populations into the retired population. And on slide 12, this shows a breakdown of the gains and losses for the 2024 plan year. Some of the more notable ones here, as I mentioned, the retirements and terminations, not necessarily occurring as we would have assumed, probably due to a combination of the salary increases being greater than expected and the just the overall economy. Those have created losses for the most recent plan year, as well as the I've kind of lumped together compensation and COLA increases, but the bulk of that is compensation increases of a little over $4 million. One positive number in here is the retiree mortality. Even with the current assumption of 105% of the RP 2014 with projected mortality improvements, we saw a gain on retiree mortality, which means our assumption may be a little conservative there in that mortality experience of the plan is a little greater than we're assuming. Then lastly, on slide 13, this shows the open plan, the TCRS open plan. So this is based on evaluation date of June 30, 2024, but the contribution period is the period, the 12-month period that we're in now. Again, the active members is now 352 versus I think 347 in the closed plan. So now this is the bulk of the population. The annualized salary, though, this is still a smaller portion of the total salary, as you might imagine, since the legacy plan has folks that are more experienced, more longer service, while this group represents those generally with less than 8 years of service. The inactive members, though, continue to grow at 161. The discount rate in this plan, of course, is 6.75% for the overall TCRS plan. The present value of benefits is the same concept as for the closed plan. This is the value of all benefits expected to be earned. The employee contribution rate is a fixed 5%. The employer rate is actuarially determined at 7.44%, so largely stable from the last couple of years. The funded ratio of the plan is up slightly after a decrease for the prior year. So going back to 2022, the funded ratio was 90.5%, dropped down to 84, and then bounced back to 89.8% for June 30, 2024. But again, the contribution rate is fairly stable at 7.44%, down slightly from the prior year, but up from 2 years ago. No, I've gone through that fairly quickly, but any questions?
Yeah, I've got two on, so on pages 9 and 10. So the liability is growing faster than the asset value. Is there a tipping point that we have to be watching out for? And then on page 10, when you look at what when you think about funded versus unfunded, how are we going to make up the gaps so this doesn't kind of run into a train wreck?
Sure. As far as the trend, we don't expect the recent growth of the liability to continue. One, because we're not continuing to lower the discount rate as we were for the last 5 years. Also, some of the other factors that have been driving the liability up, such as the pay increases greater than expected and the folks putting off retirements and terminations, we don't expect those trends to continue either. They may to some level, but not, we think not to the extent and duration that they have for the last 2 or 3 years.
So we've got 5 years of data here, they're all going up.
Correct. Of course, we expect the liability to go up. The liability is always expected to go up until the plan gets very, very mature. Of course, we expect the assets to go up as well. As far as a tipping point, I don't think that's a concern. The contributions coming in now at 11 million versus the unfunded liability of, I believe, between 80 and 90 million, is going to amortize that unfunded over a relatively short period of time of a little over 10 years. So I think before you reach any tipping point, the contributions coming into the plan to reduce the unfunded liability are going to, close that gap between assets and liabilities.
And if I may relate it to that, it's one thing to see these numbers in the absolute, it'd be also good, helpful to see comparative data. So how does Franklin stack up to similarly sized cities? Comparison to say, are we trending in the right direction? It's one thing if we're, hey, everybody's moving in this direction versus, hey, we're moving in a different direction. So just a question or thought about that.
And I think we just have to make sure that we look at comparisons of closed plans, because part of this is, and Kevin can kind of speak to, once you close a pension plan down, you have a cycle that we're at a certain point, and that you see, because you certainly are not adding any new people, and you're not adding, when Kevin was talking about, we're adding all of our entry-level people that still have another 30 years to work. They're all coming into a different plan.
Right.
So
Yeah,
maybe you can talk about that life cycle on the closed.
Yeah, the life cycle of a closed pension plan is a little dicey from the standpoint that as you get a smaller and smaller active population who are older, who any changes in their behavior when they do get a pay increase greater than expected, or when they do put off retirement, it can cause a spike in their liability. In an ongoing active plan where you had a lot of young active members averaged in with them, those differences aren't as noticeable. But when you have an older closed group, it's much more noticeable. So you almost have to look at the closed plan and the TCRS plan together and see how those look, because that's going to look, you're going to see it's still likely going up because the closed plan is so large compared to the open plan. But I think you'd see a little more stability in the overall cost of the two plans.
Way to compare them in the future.
Yeah.
So if it's going down to zero, that's one thing, that's going to go away or not be a problem down the road. But as you're looking at active plans, just some comparative data would be helpful.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Then, Christine, let's go to the next item on the agenda, which is consideration of draft resolution 2025-73, a resolution to amend certain provisions of resolution 2018-65, establishing defined contribution retirement plan effective January the 1st, 2019 for employees hired on or after January the 1st, 2017. Thanks to who wrote that.
I think that was me.
Congratulations.
And let me just make this, I can get this looking a little better here. And this staff proposal that we would like to discuss with the committee today, we, before I just, rather than just jumping into what we want to get some feedback on, wanted to start with just a snapshot of where we are, with our retirement plans, who's a member of what plan. And of course, you always have a snapshot because these are moving targets depending on who's employed at a certain day. But we looked at the snapshot of August 20th to, we had at that moment 773 active full-time employees. And as we were talking earlier in the presentation, we have crossed where a majority, even though it's not a large majority, but 54% have been hired since January 1st of 2017 and are members of the TCRS retirement plan. So we have 46% of members of the closed plan, and of course, the closed plan could mean several different types of plans within one big umbrella. But focusing for a moment on who is in the TCRS plan, we have 417 active employees, and of this number, 154 joined us within the last 2 years. And in just a moment, you'll see why we wanted to take a look at how many folks were hired within the last 2 years. So 37% of our TCRS employees have only been with us less than 2 years. We've hired a lot of employees in the last 2 years, haven't we, Kevin? And team. We've brought a lot of new people in. And then of the number who are eligible, we also have a voluntary defined contribution matching program, which is eligible for the employees that are in TCRS, which is an over and above retirement program to the defined benefit plan with the state. And the ones who are eligible, which in our current plan, you have to be here at least 2 years to participate in this voluntary dollar-for-dollar matching program. And this is the one that we've talked about a few times, that we've been watching participation in this voluntary program. And we're currently at about 35% that are eligible participating in this voluntary dollar-for-dollar. Employee puts in money into a retirement account, and then the city matches that up to 2%. And so we have 263 employees that are eligible, and 93 are participating. And so certainly the participation rate has grown a little bit, but 35% is something that we finally that's not where we'd like to be in participation. And so we're going to talk about a couple of ideas to perhaps, if this committee thinks there could be some value, and if the board agreed, perhaps could be ways to increase that voluntary participation. But then we also want to give you that point-in-time snapshot of who's in the closed the closed single employer plan. These are people who these are employees who were hired before 12/31/2016, and we still have 325 employees in these plans. We actually have 356 in the total plan, but we have 325 that are members of the defined benefit. Most of the people in the closed plan are in the defined benefit plan. And then we have 31 members who, there was a window in time in which employees could choose a defined contribution plan, and there's currently 31 members. I believe that was 2010 through 2016. That was an option for employees. So we do have a very important group still left in the closed plan, but as our actuary was describing, that number has been, of course, going down, and it's gone down pretty quickly in the last just 3 or 4 years. So we want to spend a moment focusing on what this this voluntary defined contribution plan for our employees that are members of the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System. And we'll, as a little bit of background, this plan, this dollar-for-dollar match plan, it was modeled after a neighboring city to us. And we modeled it after a neighboring city that has had this program for many, many years. And it has been a successful program for them, and they have been members of TCRS actually since the city had a retirement plan. They joined the state plan over 50 years ago, and they had this program, and the board decided wanted to set this program up for these employees hired since 2017, and so we've been administering this program, in which it is completely voluntary. An employee doesn't have to participate, but it does have the provisions of you become eligible at 2 years of service, and it is a dollar-for-dollar match up to 2%. And so this is the program that we have only about 35% participation in. And I've talked with our counterparts at this neighboring city, and they do have higher participation than we do. I think there's probably a lot of good reasons why they do have higher participation. Certainly, when your colleagues who have been working for your employer for much longer than you, or your supervisors have had the same pension, same retirement program, you just hear about it. and you, it's probably more in a culture because that has been there longer. And this for us has only been here, it was established in 2019, so it's not brand new, but if your supervisor is not in that program or a trusted colleague who you look to for institutional knowledge isn't in that program, you're not probably going to hear about it. But it also, there's a little bit of a sense of, because when you onboard with the city, you get lots of really great information. You go through a program, and our HR department tells you about retirement benefits, but you have to wait 2 years to sign up. There's a span of time there, and a lot happens in 2 years. And then you hear about the program, and you may not be as excited about it as you were when you went through orientation 2 years before. And the thought of joining a new retirement program just may not be at the top of your list of things to do. So those are just maybe a little anecdotal reasons why we think perhaps we don't have the participation. But it is we do believe this program is an important opportunity for employees to start saving for retirement, and especially if they start early in their careers, be able to have additional savings for retirement in addition to that state of Tennessee retirement plan and Social Security. So in this example, Susie putting money aside, if she put money aside 20 years later, it's certainly going to build from that dollar for dollar batch that she did in 2025.
What are her options in taking out before she retires?
Now, these are using the federal programs, the 457 and the 401A. So while you certainly, there are rules for withdrawals that would have, if you withdraw before 59 and a half, that if you could have penalties. They'll certainly be taxable as well, even if you wait until there's no penalties to withdraw. I mean, there's certainly the laws are set up to encourage people to keep those monies in their accounts until they retire, and use that for when they have needs in retirement rather than short term.
So if I'm Susie and I want to contribute 1% and have 1% matched by the city, do you think that amount entices them? Do you think that's enough to get their attention?
Well,
Do you-
that's part of what we would like to discuss with you, because we as staff have 2 recommendations that while we don't know for sure that this would encourage voluntary participation, we think it could help. And we've kept this as a voluntary program because we want people to participate if they would like to, but we would like to make that maybe either easier or more incentivize it a little bit, because it is important, especially just the power of time, if they would start putting money away earlier in their careers. But we would like to, the first recommendation that we came up with was removing that 2-year waiting period to participate in the plan. And we would recommend that new full-time employees could elect to join the program upon hire. They could go through onboarding, get excited about the program, and go ahead and sign up. Now, we would still keep a 2-year vesting period for the employer portion. The employee portion, of course, if they left before 2 years, that's their money. However, that 2-year time gap could be, part of why we don't have higher participation. And
I know this might be difficult for human resources, but do you keep track once they hit their 2-year mark and then send them emails or remind of the plan?
yes, and we do.
And I think there's also a benefit to starting that habit right at the beginning, that savings habit. Open the door for that right at the very beginning. It is just seen as something you start right at the beginning. You're not changing your paycheck 2 years in. I just think there's a natural, that's just a harder thing to do then. And I think it's a real opportunity. It leverages that city money for longer too for these folks.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
for recruiting and retention, where does 2-year wait fit in the kind of municipal career path? Is it abnormal for someone to have to wait a period of time, or is it more normal to start right away?
Well, the 2-year waiting period, that was the plan that our neighboring city uses. And so the modeling just came from the neighboring city, because we had not had a plan like this before.
No, but my question is, if you're you've hired 150 more people, and they're coming from other places, from a competitive standpoint, is waiting 2
Oh,
years
okay.
impeding your ability to attract and retain better talent, which would be another reason to make it immediate, would be a question.
It probably depends where these employees are coming from. If they're if they're in a role that is a public sector type of role, that they came to us from another public sector. I mean, this is a unique plan. I mean, what our neighbor does, having a dollar-for-dollar match in addition to a defined benefit pension, is something extra. To just have, because typically when you have a defined benefit pension, that's what your employer's funding. There's opportunities to do a 457, and the employee, is able to participate, but their employer's not putting in dollar-for-dollar matches. And that's for public sector. What our neighbor does with having even this DC match is something that's, we've even heard it referred to as a sweetener. It's a little bit extra. Now, certainly coming from, employees that come from the private sector, then private sector, I don't think typically has a waiting period, even though there's a vesting. There may be a vesting to keep the employer money at a certain point. I certainly think that's fairly common, but there's not a 2-year waiting period just to participate.
The other piece, just the base program has a 5-year vesting threshold. So this is a little more aggressive in that standpoint compared to the base pension program. The other factor for us is there is a benefit difference from the closed plan and the folks entering the TCRS program today. This does help, sort of shrink that gap somewhat between the two plans. And that's a question I get from time to time, is there is a disparity because they're just different programs. But the reality is we've picked the most, I guess, generous TCRS option we can with the legacy program, and then we've added this additional sweetener on top of it, and we think we want to try to give a path to try to encourage more participation, and a path that gives people a chance to put really 6% of their pay aside over from the beginning, with the city paying half of that is a pretty good incentive. And so we're going to, should we make those changes, we'll aggressively push that out with folks that may not be that 2 years yet, try to get them on. Others just at the additional amount, maybe that's enough to push them over, and then as new folks come on, just make that almost part of the onboarding process for them.
Well, and what is a good target? You're at 35%, what's the statistical average? Is it double that? So thinking about what your target ought to be, I would think from a attraction and retention, that'd be a big win. Even if the vesting is delayed, right?
Yeah.
You get them into the plan right away. And the other question it raises for me is, are you allowed to do an automatic opt-in unless you tell us you want out? So
That is one approach.
So if you
We
move
stop
to-
short of that, but you could just say
But you
you're
could
signed
say-
up unless you tell us no.
Well, if you start from day one, you could say you're in the plan unless you tell us you don't want to be. So you're not forcing them to be in the plan.
Yeah.
But a lot of this, at least in my experience, is people just don't get around to it.
Yeah.
They want to wait and see. And then, like you said, you wait 2 years and all of a sudden it's like, I got other things I have to
Yeah,
worry
you feel like you're taking a pay cut when you're actually
Yeah.
getting more
So
money from
just
the
some-
city.
Just some thought. I'm a fan of immediate access to it, and think about opting. You have to tell us you don't want to be in it. Otherwise, even at a minimum 1%, at least get you kind of in the automatic.
Get in the habit.
Now, would this be for all employees being hired now, or is it just for the employees that are on the defined contribution plan?
These are all of the TCRS members, so anyone that's been hired since 17 that have access to this voluntary program. And as Eric was sharing, we do have this second consideration of increasing the maximum on the dollar-for-dollar match up to 3% from 2%, which is the current program, but then continuing to keep the kind of step into the programs at 1% and 2%. We currently just have the 1%. If you can't do a 2% but want to participate right now, you can sign up for 1%. So we would keep this kind of the step in step-ins to the program or a step back because we want it to be, it's been voluntary, but perhaps that going up to 3%, which would be a 6% total, especially as an aspiration. Perhaps folks can't get to 3% from the start, but if they'll eventually get there, that could be meaningful.
My recommendation would be try one before the both, because you won't know what's driving the behavior. So I'd opt to go immediate access first, see if that changes your numbers, and if it doesn't, then kind of add another carrot to it. But if you do both at the same time, you're not sure what's driving the greater participation. So just one thought.
There's two ways to look at that. The immediate sign-in, I think, gets us a little, well, that gives us an advantage over some of our competitors. And so, well, I guess they both would, because
Of our neighbor?
Yeah. They sign them up at 2 years, or do they?
2
sign
years.
them up immediate? Okay.
2 year, that's where the 2-year
I was
waiting
thinking
period
they
comes from.
were earlier as well, so.
No,
that-
they're
yeah.
2 years.
So both of those are essentially advantages over our competition.
Mayor?
Yeah, a couple of questions, a couple of comments. First of all, if I were hiring on as a new employee and that was offered and it's immediate, you know, I think that's very attractive versus them dangling the carrot, say, well, you'd be here 2 years, you can get it. My questions have to do with the salary range of that 35% that are participating. Are those higher salaried folks, or is it kind of a blended of
What-
everybody? And what is that fiscal note for the 35% that are participating?
Well, that's a nice walk into the next slide, but I did look at the salaries of who's in that TCRS group for these first, who is less than 2 years, and then their salaries for the entire group. And it's something that our actuary was sharing. Of course, for the most part, our employees who've been hired in the last 8 years, and certainly in the last 2 years, and, entry level into the city are lower paid than employees who've been here longer periods. The average salary for employees who've been less than 2 years that have not had an opportunity to join the program yet, that average salary was $63,000. And then of the entire group in TCRS, I believe it was higher, but I believe it was in the $70,000 range. So these are employees that they are newer to public service. So, certainly, it's not just assumed that it's an easy thing to do, but the value of time is just so important if there's an employer match opportunity to put money aside, because many of these, we hope a good number of these folks will be here 30 years, and that value over time can be certainly meaningful. But I did look at those salaries for those groups, not necessarily who was just participating, but who would be eligible to participate, especially as we try to make some plan changes that would bring some people in that haven't been in.
I do, on first blush, like the suggestion that make it immediate and hold off on the increasing it. But the more I've thought about that, it's going to take a pretty good while to have that cohort of people that have come in to really know if there's trends. So I would really advocate for just increase, make everybody eligible, increase it to 3%, just move forward.
Mr. Chair, when I look at the disparity issue between the closed plan and the other folks, I think I would lean towards that as well, because I think we do need to do a little bit more to close that gap. This helps with that. It's not a huge number, but I think it would matter to our folks to show some progress there. So if you had to choose, I would pick that over the earlier enrollment, but I think they both are important, and I'd like to see us do it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Yes.
No, I was going to make a motion to approve immediate participation for new hires and the maximum employee contribution be raised from 2% to 3%.
Proper motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second that. Any further discussion on that?
Yes.
Yes.
Just to be clear, when the new hire comes in, they're gonna be offered this, and it's either a yes or no, and then they can't go back to it?
No, they can sign up anytime.
No, they can say no, we'll think about it later, they could sign up, they could even join and something
They can
happens.
adjust the
They can adjust it,
percentage
they
too.
can,
Yeah, so it's very flexible, and they can adjust it really at any time.
Bob?
Just a question I know will be important to BOMA. How will you absorb the extra cost? Is it factored into the budget? Are the taxpayers going to be affected by it?
certainly there is an employer cost. We've had to just make budget estimates for this program because we didn't have history. It's not had a very high cost to this point because of the low participation. This most current fiscal year that we're going through an audit right now, we spent, it was $132,000. I think it would be, while we would, I don't know exactly what we think the ultimate goal in participation, but if there's a milestone in participation, getting to 50%, as we'll have a larger group, because right now that 2-year group is not even included because they've not been eligible yet. So assuming that if we broaden who's eligible to join, if we get up to a 50% participation, even at a higher maximum conservatively, there could be a budget increase at that point of $237,000 based off current salaries. So that would be in a future year. I think it would probably take a couple of years to get there because we've got a ways to go to get to 50%. But
I guess my question is it going to be offset by something else, or is it de minimis to what your overall budget's going to be, and you'll just absorb it in the overall operating budget kind of thing?
I think what we will be doing is actually, looking at what, we always look at, what is a realistic expense to appropriation to ask for in the budget. In a couple of years, it could very well be, instead of being $130,000, it could be $370,000, or there's probably going to be a couple steps before we get to 50%. But it would be part of the recommended budget that we would, that the city administrator.
Yeah, we've been pretty consistently below what we've been budgeting, so I think actually from a budgetary standpoint, we're probably not gonna see a dramatic change, if any. It probably may well be within that number still, but I think showing that, that path forward would be a good one. But I don't think it would be a significant budget impact.
Bob, I think some of us are looking at a downtown neighborhood tax increase. Just on Third Avenue.
Well, that's an obvious.
Noted.
We had a motion and a proper second. Is that, have we ended our discussion?
Is there room for more discussion, or is that inappropriate?
Yeah, oh, no.
I just want to say this, that I'm so excited we're thinking about this, we're about to vote on this and recommend it to BOMA, because I don't act like this is my original thought, but talking to Bob, the fact that someone can start immediately, what a retention, a chance for retention that is. They always have to factor that in, as opposed to making them wait 2 years to get there. Second thing is, my team's never had a great reason as to saying why I need to wait 2 years. To not have to say you have to wait 2 years, and you could start now, and to your point, Scott, you don't have to start now, but you can start now. You start later, you can adjust it. It's huge for us, I think. So, and then again, I do agree with what you're saying. If we do them both, you really can't tell what drove it. And so I agree, but I'm so excited about the fact that this sweetener will do such a great thing for the employees to close the gap. I just hope that we do vote for this, and I hope that BOMA agrees with this as well.
Okay. If there are no other questions, let's do a roll call vote. Mayor Moore, how do you vote? Yes. Keith McGee, how do you vote?
Yes.
Kevin Townsend, how do you vote?
Yes.
Scott Quinn, how do you vote?
Yes.
Suzanne Carter, how do you vote?
Yes.
Bob Ravender, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So we will present that to the full board. Do you workshop or just
We will
do
come
it
to
at
workshop.
Do it at a workshop?
But we do need a little time. We've got some documents, plan documents to work on. So we really wanted to come to this committee first and hear your conversation. And based on your recommendations, staff will work on those plan documents, which we would then work with our law department to prepare a document for BOMA's consideration. But we'll go to a work session once we get those finalized. But we do appreciate the discussion and that direction, because that'll help us get ready to go to the full board.
All right, let's go to item 5, discussion of the future structure for the responsibilities of the Employee Pension Committee. Christine, you're up again.
Christine and I will share
Okay,
this one.
well-
We had talked to you at our last meeting about looking long-term at the structure of this committee, looking at some of the information you received even earlier in this meeting regarding the composition of the plan, of the investments, of the membership of it as we continue to move more and more towards what is largely under TCRS management and oversight. And with that in mind, would there be a better, more streamlined approach to the city oversight of the plan, especially since there's such a small component that is in that non-conforming category that requires direct attention of this group and of the board, and the fact that ultimately the board is the decision maker, you're advising them. And so we had put on the table the idea of transitioning this committee towards a version of using a subcommittee of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, our Budget and Finance Committee in particular. Would that be a wise way to do that? We could still promote and use that as a connection point for employees and give notice that at certain dates, the Budget and Finance Committee will be acting as a recommending body on the pension structure and different topics related to it, and would that be an appropriate and a better path forward long-term? I did get some feedback that there was interest in that and some interest in maybe moving sooner than later to that structure. Christine and I have talked a little more about it. We've also had the opportunity to talk to our employee representatives, both Suzanne and Scott, and welcome their feedback on that and talk about how we might move forward in a way that maybe streamlines that, but also still is open and accessible to our employees and keeps people informed about where we are with the system and anything that's working, especially through TCRS's management and oversight of the pension program itself. So, Christine, I don't know if you want to add anything else on that or thoughts on that as we open it up to this group and get some more guidance and talk about where we go from here.
I think Eric did a great job at the high level, just kind of talking through what we've been thinking about for some time. But certainly, any sort of structure that we may move toward, I don't think we would lose any of the elements this committee has, whether it be important reports or staff interaction or availability to staff, and it would certainly never be our intention at all, whether it be for employees or even our Board of Mayor and Aldermen who volunteer a lot of their time and for many years to this committee. So we don't want to lose that access, but certainly as time has gone along, the administration of that closed plan has changed the duties of this committee significantly, and so we do want to be effective in how we provide this same information and access, even if it looks a little different.
Well, I'd say this. Man, well, you and I have been on this since 2007. And what we were seeing in 2007 is totally, completely different from what we're seeing today. I mean, for anybody here who has maybe not been around for that length of time, we had money managers, and we were looking at evaluating each of the money managers and each of the accounts, and we had that type of participation and that type of overlook. We have not had that. Well, we haven't had it gradually reduced since 2017. So I have also said something to Eric, and I've said something to the mayor also, at looking at the structure of the committee and what we have oversight for, and maybe some of them, the amount of time that we meet, which is not a lot of time per year, but just to maybe streamline this somewhat. So that's my take on that also. I guess I was on this committee prior to 2003, because we had it, but for years, that was the function of this committee, was to manage and look at the managers of each of the groups that we had investments in. So I thank Christine and Eric for bringing this forward. Any other comments? Yes, Bob?
Are you recommending eliminating this commission? Is that what the recommendation is?
Yeah, we would transition this commission into really an outshoot of the board through the Budget and Finance Committee. Sort of, we do that with the function of the Audit Committee is really performed by that Budget and Finance Committee in that role. And it is kind of the first stop with these budgetary and financial related topics, and this would seem to fit well with that already kind of existing assignment to that group. So it would streamline it. As I said, we would be very intentional about informing employees about it and working that out too. It will be a public meeting as well, so citizens get to know, but our employees would be particularly interested, and we would make additional efforts to make sure they're aware of that meeting being, fulfilling that role.
So I just get here and you're gonna eliminate the job?
Yeah. Well, it's because you did such a great job, yeah.
Suzanne, Scott, any comments? You are the employee, so have you had any feedback? I don't guess you've had enough. I don't guess there's been enough knowledge or anything going out, has it, to have any feedback on something such as this?
No, like Eric and Christine said, we did get to meet separately, and that was very kind of them to do that. I think Scott and I both agreed with the recommendation and trust that the employees will still have the information that they need, and that's what's most important, I think.
So if you did it to the committee, and that's Budget and Finance, any employee participation on that portion of the Budget and Finance Committee, or would you just, how would you involve? Because this is what we are getting, and this is the information going back to the employee through the employee participation in this committee then. And I know that in the past and even now, we are having employees who are certainly diligent in what they're doing when they're sitting here to carry that information forward.
Absolutely, and that is, I mean, that is an option for you to think about if you wanted to formally add that, but we also just believe too, we can provide that outreach to employees
Okay.
overall and meet that need and really make it more broadly available to everybody as an option as well. So that's something for you. If you want to provide for that, you still can. We would look for your guidance on that, but I think that's something for you to think about, weigh in on. And we can go from there. We are in a cycle coming up. Suzanne's seat is being considered I think this fall. So that's just something, if you want to move in that direction, kind of syncing it up with that term might make some sense, but we're open to your feedback on that and how you want to think about it.
Well, I'm gonna give each one an opportunity, starting with you, Mary. You've listened to this. I think I've said something to you in the past. I'm not, at some meetings that we've had, so I'll open the floor up if you want to have any comments.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I think this committee has served a very useful purpose over the years, but since we've transferred everything to TCRS, I think it's become a less important committee. I think as we work through this process, I want to make sure that we do not eliminate the opportunity for employees to participate in decisions, because I think there are going to be decisions that we need employee participation on. Like today, I thought it was important to hear about this the voluntary contribution thing. That's an important thing for us to hear from the employees, that typically we might not be getting that input in budget and finance if we didn't have some input. I'm not necessarily advocating that they be on the Budget and Finance Committee. I don't really think we can put them on there. I don't think that's, I guess I don't know what the rules would be there. But I think there ought to be some special segment where there is consideration for things that this committee might have considered, where it could be a segment of that Budget and Finance.
Bob, you're next.
I would concur with the mayor's comments, with the employee feedback and input loop, and I think any opportunity to streamline government's a good thing, so.
Kevin?
I too agree with Mayor and Bob. I think that the use of this committee has changed just in my time here. I'm almost employee number one on TCRS as I came in March of 2017. Not really the first employee, but one of the first few. And what we can discuss here, it's managed by TCRS now, so there's less of a need. And I think Christine brought up the fact that we've switched now. There's more people under TCRS than the others. So I see less of a need for this. We can still get the same thing accomplished, but the way that Christine announced.
Keith?
I agree with all the members before me. And the one suggestion I would have is to keep some system in place where employees were involved on a regular communication basis, not waiting on them to ask you questions.
Okay.
Because once you start waiting on them to ask you questions, information then starts to close, and before long, they're not hearing from you. And so regardless of how you're structured, I think it's very helpful when you can have conversations like today where employees can weigh in.
Eric, Christine, you've heard the comments from the group, the committee. Do you wish to do more work on this? I mean, I don't know that this is necessarily a voting item, is it? Do you think it
I think
is?
this sets the stage for us to bring back a
Right.
specific proposal to
Okay.
you, and then you could recommend it to the board, and then the board could act. You know, maybe sometime by the end of this year or early next. I think given this, we would roll off on the election process for employee representative, but get that guidance and go from there.
I can raise a question. Is it possible, I mean, since there seems to be consensus on this, is it possible for us to make a motion to put it in the chair's hands to bring to BOMA based on your recommendations?
You certainly could. I mean, if you feel like you have given enough direction, we can take that and send it right to the board and share it with you as we share it with them. And if you have feedback, you could provide that to us. We certainly will let you know when that is on the work session, if you want to participate in that as well. So we could streamline that if you want to include that in your motion, give that direction, and we'll provide you with an update as it's moving forward.
Well, before we do that, it probably would be as comfortable for me as anything if this goes to the workshop without necessarily the chairman's recommendation, because we discuss stuff like this is always on the agenda. And, you know, if you want to attach my name to it after it gets to the board. But this needs to go through the workshop. It needs to have an opportunity for less structured questions and conversations concerning this. And there may be, we may be missing something. I don't think we are, but I would just recommend that they put that on the workshop, the next one we have, or the next one, or whenever they're ready and have gotten whatever written documentation they need to make a proposal. But I would go with the workshop definitely before I'd go to the board and have the alderman voting on it. I think I know I would. I was going to say something different, but I'll keep it at that statement.
I think I'd advocate to walk it maybe a little bit slower to make sure staff's done adequate
Right.
research and comparison, then bring it to the work session and then go from there.
And I see our city attorney nodding in approval back there.
I mean, the only thing is you are
Okay. All right. Christine?
But I would share, I don't think it's wrong, I don't think it would be a bad idea to take a little time and get that all pulled together. We, certainly, this is, this was not brought to be, wanting to do something either in a rush or, hastily by any means. So, we certainly have time to get together. We have the right folks here that we wanted to hear this conversation as well. And this discussion, including Shauna, and we also have Frank Carney, our pension counsels, with us today. So we're going to have their advisement, and we could always come back there, the first on December. We could even meet in like early December and look at something that's more put together. There's usually some business there toward the end of the calendar year. So, I mean, we certainly could get us back together, whether it be the end of the calendar year or even the first part of 2026. But we'd rather do this right and have all the different viewpoints considered. I know we certainly have the seat that Suzanne is in is coming up, but I don't think that precludes us from being thoughtful either.
And I think she just would stay in the seat until this is worked out, right? So we're not letting you off the hook, Suzanne.
All right.
You might end up being the longest-serving single-term employee.
So we've got a committee meeting for Budget and Finance on December the 4th that will include the audit in that meeting.
We do,
Okay.
Yes,
yes.
that's our-
So,
December 4th.
I think 3 months should be enough for staff to look at this. If we need more, we'll do that then. But I'd do the 3 month. I'd try to put it sometime maybe in December if you wanted to, and we can look at it from a budget and finance standpoint from the committee level on that right there then. So basically, I guess what we're saying here is not necessarily do we need a motion. This is a recommendation from us to you to look at this item that we've discussed and the responsibilities of the Employee Pension Committee. And again, I say I'm sitting here smiling, knowing what I remember seeing, and we've got 8 or 10 money managers sitting out there, and we're getting a report from each one of them. Then we've got somebody that's monitoring that report to see if that's right. And then we've got them compared to some other money manager. And if we don't like what they're doing, then we're switching money managers to go to another account or something. And that was the drill in 2007. And the mayor asked me to chair the committee. So that made even more confusion.
The only thing you your miss saying there was that they also sent us a bill.
Oh, yes, a big bill. Any other questions or comments? Guys, you know sort of where we're going and where we're going? Okay. Any other questions or comments? Anything from anyone? We're changing plans on this. So just exactly
Plan.
what is involved?
The plan document, you have a
Plan
formal
document, yes.
pension plan document, and the representation and composition of the pension committee is part of that. So we
Okay.
would just be modifying that to be really a subset of the board appointed by the mayor.
All right,
And so right now, we're envisioning that to be the Budget and Finance Committee. 10 years from now, there might be some different structure that the board adopts, but the mayor will need to know that he or she needs to appoint a group to serve that role. This mayor may choose to make that the Budget and Finance Committee. We may need to just sort of give ourselves enough flexibility that it is some subset of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen fulfilling that capacity.
all right. Any questions or comments on what we discussed? All right. Then we will entertain a lot of people's favorite motion, and that is a motion to adjourn. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Is there a second? Second. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?